I thought my career in Florida was finally stabilizing until the day my coworker, Vanessa, humiliated me during a $1 million pitch for an elite client. Her sabotage was so calculated, so cruel, that it left me questioning every friendship and alliance I'd built. But right when I thought my reputation was shattered, the client revealed a truth that unraveled everything I believed about loyalty, betrayal, and corporate power. What followed was a spiral of secrets, manipulation, and emotional landmines that forced me to confront the darkest parts of my past. In the end, I learned that sometimes the greatest revenge is delivered by the truth you didn't even know you had. I still remember the temperature of that room. It was cold, unnervingly cold, like the air vents were whispering warnings I couldn't quite hear. I stood at the front of the glass-walled conference space on the 27th floor of the Westbridge Tower in Miami, palms damp, heart steady, spine straight. It was the biggest opportunity of my career. The Bailey Tech expansion pitch, a deal worth just over $1 million. I had practiced for weeks, rehearsed every slide, smoothed over every detail. And yet, there was this flicker of unease under my ribs, a quiet pressure, a feeling that something or someone wanted me to fail. Vanessa walked in last, as usual. Her heels clicked across the marble like she owned the room. She always had that energy, effortless confidence, sharp eyes, and a smile warm enough to make you forget she was, in many ways, the most dangerous person I'd ever met in the workplace. She brushed past me, whispering just loud enough for only me to hear. "Good luck, Mia, don't choke." Why did that feel like a warning more than encouragement? The projector warmed to life, humming softly. The elite client, a man named Christopher Hale, CEO of a private tech investment group, leaned back in his chair. He had the kind of presence that made the whole room lean with him. Calm. Sharp. Observing everything. I started confidently. "My name is Mia Reyes, and today, I'll be presenting our proposed integration plan for Bailey Tech's East Coast expansion." But then, slide 3 appeared. And my stomach dropped. It wasn't my slide. It was a mess. A completely altered graphic filled with errors, numbers flipped, notes missing, colors wrong, the kind of amateur disaster that made it look like I hadn't prepared at all. My pulse pounded in my ears. Behind me, someone clicked their tongue. A tiny, mocking sound. "Vanessa." I tried to recover. I tried to explain. But Hale's eyes narrowed, studying me like I'd just confessed to a crime. I apologize," I said, swallowing hard. "Omistake." No. This wasn't a mistake. This was sabotage. And I felt it, that cold sinking realization, crawl all the way down my spine. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. Vanessa stepped forward, soft smile, gentle voice dripping with false concern. "Mia," she said. "Maybe you should let someone else handle the presentation. You seem overwhelmed." Overwhelmed? No, I was being executed in front of my entire department. Then, right as the humiliation reached its peak, Christopher Hale leaned forward, folded his hands, and said, "Actually, I'd like to hear her out. Something tells me the story behind those slides is far more interesting than the slides themselves." The room stiffened. My breath caught. What did he mean by that? How did he know? And then, he said something that froze the entire room. "Mia, before you continue, I think it's time I tell you why I'm really here. If you're already feeling the knot in your stomach tightening, don't let this be the moment you walk away. People who stop here always regret it. They end up in the comments wishing they subscribed earlier. So, before things get darker, hit that subscribe button. Or if you won't, go to the comments and tell us why. I dare you." The room went so still I could hear the quiet buzz of the fluorescent ceiling lights. Christopher Hale's eyes were fixed on me, not in judgment, but in recognition. Pause. Almost like he knew exactly what was happening and who was behind it. My breath stuttered in my chest. "Why you're really here," I repeated, voice shaking more than I wanted it to. Hale gave a slow nod and reached into the sleek leather folder beside him. His movements were deliberate, steady, almost surgical. Then he slid a thick document across the glass table directly toward me. The entire conference room leaned in, hungry for the spectacle. I stared at the document but didn't dare touch it. "My visit wasn't just about your company's proposal," Hale said, his tone unreadable. "It was about you." What? Me? Why would a millionaire CEO come all the way to Miami for me? A small ripple of whispers broke across the room. Even Vanessa's smirk faltered into confusion. I forced myself to speak. Sir, I don't understand. Oh, you will, he said softly. But first, answer something for me. He carefully laced his fingers. Did you build the original proposal? My stomach tightened. Yes, I whispered, every part. He nodded, as if confirming a suspicion. And did you send the final version to your colleague last night to load into the master presentation folder? My blood ran cold. How did he know that? Everyone in the room turned to look at Vanessa. Her cheeks stiffened, the slightest twitch breaking her perfect facade. She pressed her lips together in a practiced smile. I'm sure it was just a mix-up, she said calmly. We've all had long weeks. But Hale wasn't looking at her. He was watching me. Waiting. I swallowed the heavy knot in my throat. Yes, I said. I sent it to her. And she replaced it. She replaced it on purpose. And she did it knowing this pitch could change my entire career. I felt humiliation rise like heat beneath my skin, the kind that doesn't fade, but burns itself into your memory. Hale finally leaned back, tapping a single finger on the table. Then let me rephrase, he said. Did you approve the version that was presented here today? I didn't even need to speak. My silence answered for me. His jaw tightened subtly, but enough to show he was angry. And not at me. I see, he murmured. Then with quiet finality he turned to Vanessa. Would you like to explain why you sent me 2 different versions? 2 versions? My chest tightened. My head snapped toward Vanessa. She blinked, unprepared, cornered, and for the first time since I met her, I saw something beneath her confidence. She started, voice faltering. I don't know what you're talking about. I sent you the final presentation. Hale raised a hand. A small gesture, but enough to silence the entire room. No, he said flatly. You sent me 2 files. One at 10:48 p.m., and another at 11:06 p.m. My heart thumped so loudly I almost didn't hear the rest. The first file was flawless. He blinked. Flawless. He said flawless. That was mine. I whispered before I could stop myself. Hale nodded. Yes. The work in the original file was exceptional. Exceptional. For a moment, a fleeting moment, I felt seen. But then he added. And the second file? The one labeled final? That one was intentionally damaged. Vanessa flinched. Barely, but I saw it. Everyone saw it. My throat tightened with hurt, shame, and something deeper, betrayal that cut through my chest like ice. Hale folded his hands calmly. And I'm curious to know why. Vanessa's mask finally cracked. It wasn't me, she stammered. It must have been some system error. Or Mia could have. She stopped herself, realizing what she was implying. That I sabotaged my own $1 million pitch. The insult hit harder than the humiliation. I would never. But Hale interrupted gently. I know. The certainty in his voice stunned me silent. He looked straight into me, past the embarrassment, past the shaking hands, past the fear, as if he saw the truth I had been trying so hard to keep together. You're not the type to destroy your own work, he said. Then, pointedly, to the rest of the room. And anyone here who knows you even slightly, knows that. It felt like the breath I'd been choking on finally loosened. But the next words he said, those changed everything. Before I explain why I came here today, Hale said slowly, you should know this sabotage wasn't your biggest problem. I froze. What did he mean? What could be worse than this? He tapped the folder again. There's something in here you haven't been told, he said. Something you deserve to know. And once you hear it, your entire view of this company, and the people inside it, will change forever. The air evaporated from the room. My chest constricted. What was he talking about? What did they hide from me? Hale pulled the folder closer and opened it. My hands trembled. My entire body tensed. And then, he slid a single paper toward me. Not a contract. Not a report. Not a presentation. A termination notice. With my name on it. Dated for today. The world fell out from under me. If this moment hit you the way it hit me, don't leave yet. Most people walk away here, thinking it won't get worse. But it does so much worse. If you're staying, hit subscribe. If you're not, tell us in the comments why you'd abandon someone right when everything collapses. I stared at the paper like it couldn't possibly be real. A termination notice. Signed. Stamped. Prepared. For today. The words blurred as my eyes stung. For immediate dismissal. Performance discrepancies. Unprofessional conduct. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and ripped something vital out. I lifted my gaze slowly, and the room wasn't a room anymore. It was a graveyard. And I was the one being buried. Vanessa's face was pale, but not from guilt, from panic that her plan had been exposed. Her eyes darted across the document like she'd never seen it before. But she had. I knew she had. I felt it in my bones. Christopher Hale leaned back, watching me with unsettling calm. His expression was unreadable. But his eyes? Those were burning with something fierce, something like indignation on my behalf. My voice cracked as I whispered. Why? Why does this even exist? No one answered. Not a soul. The silence was louder than any accusation. Finally, Hale spoke, his tone low but cutting through the tension. I requested the full employee roster and current HR reports before coming, he said. This notice was attached to your file. Scheduled for delivery at the end of this meeting. My stomach twisted. End of this meeting. Meaning no matter how hard I worked, no matter how flawless my original presentation was, they planned to fire me today. No warning. No conversation. Just an execution masked as company restructuring. He swallowed hard. I didn't do anything wrong. Hale nodded. I know. I looked around the room searching for one face willing to stand with me. Even my closest coworkers were frozen, eyes wide, terrified of choosing the losing side. That's when the real humiliation hit. I wasn't just being fired. I was being abandoned. My voice trembled. Why? Why would HR prepare this without telling me? A soft laugh slipped from the back of the room. Cold. Sharp. Familiar. It was Marianne, the head of HR, a woman who'd always looked at me like I was a placeholder. She stepped forward, arms crossed. Let's be realistic, Mia, she said. Your performance has been declining for months. My heart stopped. What? That's not? She cut me off. Your recent project delays. I submitted all of those early, I whispered, horrified. Your communication with clients. I scored the highest client satisfaction rating last quarter. And this presentation. That wasn't my file. My voice cracked, emotion spilling over. It was sabotaged. You saw the timestamp. You saw. But Marianne lifted a perfectly manicured hand, silencing me with ease. It's not about fault, she said coolly. It's about the company's direction. And frankly, you're not aligned with it. Not aligned. That's HR language for. You were in the way. I felt my pulse hammering against my ribs. So you planned to fire me before the pitch, I whispered. Before seeing how today went. Her smile was thin. Calculated. Yes. A part of me broke right there. The loyal part. The hopeful part. The part that believed hard work protected you. I didn't even have the strength to hide the tears building. But why? I whispered. What did I do? Vanessa stepped forward, voice soft with false pity. You became too noticeable, she murmured. My breath hitched. Too noticeable? Hale's jaw tightened. He turned his gaze toward her sharp, assessing, dangerous. What exactly does that mean? He asked. Vanessa shrugged with forced innocence. You know how competitive corporate environments are. Some people grow quickly. Some people don't. Mia stood out. Maybe too much. I stared at her. Too much? I worked hard. I earned my spot. I never stepped on anyone. But Vanessa? She had been stepping on me the entire time. Suddenly, Hale pushed back his chair and stood. Slowly. Deliberately. Everyone went quiet. His voice was calm. But it vibrated with restrained anger. Let me get this straight, he said. You sabotaged her work. You created a false decline in her performance metrics. You prepared her termination before this meeting even began. And you expected no one to notice. Marianne lifted her chin. Mr. Hale, with respect, this is an internal matter. No, he said, stepping closer. It's not. He reached for the folder again, but instead of handing me the termination notice, he pulled out something else. My team did a background scan on your department's email logs, he said. We found unauthorized access to Mia's files. At least 6 incidents. My chest tightened. Unauthorized access. Vanessa. She went still like a predator caught under a spotlight. I'm not sure what you're implying, she said, voice trembling now. Hale didn't blink. I'm implying, he said softly, that someone in this room has been targeting her. The entire conference room froze. And then Hale said something that turned my world inside out. And I know exactly who it was. The breath left my lungs. He knew? Everyone's eyes darted between us waiting, desperate, terrified. Hale stepped closer to me, his voice dropping into something dangerously calm. But before I say their name, there's something else Mia needs to know. The room tensed. My pulse spiked. What more could there possibly be? Hale looked directly into my eyes with a certainty that made my stomach twist. Mia, he said quietly. This isn't the first time they tried to get rid of you. My heart stopped. If you're still here, you feel what I felt. And trust me, this is only the beginning. Most people click away now because it's too heavy. But if you stay, hit subscribe. If you don't, tell us in the comments why you can watch someone's life fall apart and still walk away. The words echoed in my head long after Hale said them. This isn't the first time they tried to get rid of you. My breath caught in my throat. I felt the air thicken, stretching between every person in that room like invisible threads tightening around my ribs. I stared at him, barely able to force out the whisper. What do you mean? Hale didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed the folder on the table, resting his fingertips on it like it contained the verdict to a trial I didn't know I'd been part of. He looked around the room, letting his gaze settle on each executive, each department head, each coworker who suddenly couldn't meet his eyes. Someone, he said slowly, has been actively undermining your role here, for months. My heart pounded. Months. My chest tightened. The projects that were mysteriously reassigned. The emails that never reached clients. The meetings I was accidentally excluded from. I thought I was being paranoid. Overthinking. Too sensitive. But this was intentional. Who? I whispered. Hale didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he pulled out another sheet from the folder. This one was thicker, several pages stapled together. He placed it in front of me. I hesitated before turning it over. The top line read, Internal Performance Audit. Unusual Access Pattern Report. My blood ran cold. I skimmed the first page. Then the second. Then the third. And every line, every timestamp, every irregularity circled in red. It all pointed to one single user. My eyes landed on the name. And my stomach dropped so violently it felt like the floor had vanished. Vanessa Clark, Senior Project Coordinator. I looked up. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. Her lips pressed into a tight line like she was holding her breath. Hale spoke calmly, but the tension beneath his voice was sharp. These access logs show repeated entry into Mia's private files. Edits made under her credentials. Deleted drafts. Altered reports. Forwarded client messages hidden in spam folders. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't a rivalry. This wasn't competition. This was war. And she had been fighting it alone in the shadows while I walked around believing she was a friend. I swallowed hard, tears burning but refusing to fall. Why would you do that to me? I whispered. Vanessa stepped back like the words hit her physically. It wasn't, you don't understand. Explain it then. Hale said sharply. She opened her mouth. But no sound came out. Behind her, Marianne from HR stepped forward. And suddenly finally pieces clicked. Too quickly. Too smoothly. Too perfectly timed decisions. I turned to Marianne, a sick realization unfurling. You knew, I whispered. Her expression didn't waver. If your performance is lacking, my performance wasn't lacking. I snapped, the anger finally bubbling through the heartbreak. You knew she was sabotaging me. You knew the reports were doctored. You knew the deadlines were manipulated. Marianne lifted her chin, ice in her eyes. You were becoming disruptive. The words cut deeper than any lie. I felt myself break in two. Not from the humiliation. Not from being targeted. But from knowing. They wanted me gone so badly, they orchestrated my downfall. Why? What did I do? I bit down on my lip, tasting blood as Hale's voice filled the heavy silence. That's not all, he said softly. There's something in your file you need to see. Another sheet slid across the table. This one wasn't marked with emails or timestamps. This one had 3 words. Leadership risk assessment. I frowned, confused. What? What does that mean? Hale exhaled. You were flagged internally as a threat to team hierarchy. My heart stopped. A threat? To them? How can someone be a threat by doing their job well? I asked, voice cracking. No one answered. Hale's eyes hardened. Someone filed multiple complaints claiming you were overstepping, he said. Trying to take credit, undermine authority, and create division. I shook my head. No, that's not true, none of that is true. I know, Hale said quietly. But the others? They didn't care. Because the next page revealed who submitted the complaints. Dozens of them. 2 or 3 every month. All under the same name. Vanessa. A tremor ran through me. A cold, sickening clarity. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, her facade cracked completely. Mia, she whispered, tears forming. I didn't mean for it to go this far. My breath hitched. Why? I whispered. Just tell me why. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just cried silently, like she was mourning a disaster she started herself. My anger surged, raw, electric, overwhelming. Why do people hurt the ones who never raised a hand against them? Why do they break the ones who only ever wanted to belong? But before I could say anything, Hale's voice cut through the quiet. There's one more thing, he said. And this will explain everything. Everyone stiffened. Even Vanessa. Even Marianne. Even the executives. What? What is it? I asked. My voice barely a whisper. Hale didn't answer with words. He opened the folder, pulled out a sealed envelope, and placed it in front of me. My name was written on it. Handwritten. Not typed. This, he said quietly, is the real reason they were afraid of you. My pulse spiked. My fingers tingled. This wasn't part of my HR file. It was something else. Something personal. Something hidden. I slowly slid my finger under the seal, opened the envelope, unfolded the paper, and the moment my eyes landed on the words, I felt the world tilt violently. The room blurred. My breath vanished. Because written in black ink were the last words I ever expected to see. Mia Reyes, internal candidate for executive track promotion. My vision swam. Executive. Promotion. This year. They were never planning to fire me. They were planning to stop me from rising. And they almost succeeded. But the truth about how my name ended up on that promotion list was a secret darker than anything I'd learned so far. And Hale was about to reveal it. If you're still here, you didn't abandon me when they tried to bury me. Most people will click away now because the truth is getting uncomfortable. But if you're staying, hit subscribe. If you're leaving, tell us in the comments why betrayal that deep doesn't move you. The night Madison returned home from the charity gala, the same night Thomas humiliated her in front of board members, donors, and 200 watching eyes, something inside her shifted. Not a loud break. Not a dramatic shatter. No, it was quieter. A hairline fracture beneath the surface. And it was in that silence, in that almost invisible shift, that her entire future began to move. Madison entered the mansion. The lights were dim, the hallways were cold, and the air felt unfamiliar. As she walked deeper inside, she realized the house wasn't reacting to her presence anymore. For years, every corner had echoed her footsteps, her laughter, her routines. But tonight, it felt like the walls were holding their breath. As if waiting for something. Not for her, but for him. On most nights, the staff would greet her. Not warmly, they had learned Thomas disapproved of anything resembling closeness. But politely. Professionally. Respectfully. Tonight? No eye contact. No greeting. No one moved until she walked past. She felt it. A shift in hierarchy. A message communicated in silence. You are no longer the queen of this house. At least. Not in their eyes. Not in the eyes of the man who controlled them. As Madison reached the second floor, she noticed something she had never seen before. Thomas's office door, always locked, always forbidden, was slightly open. Just an inch. Just enough to tempt fate. Inside, she could hear whispers. Not one voice. Two. Thomas's. And a woman's. Her heart stopped mid-beat. But it wasn't romantic. It wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't even personal. It was tactical. Strategic. Cold. Thomas was discussing something he had always refused to let her near. His company's internal finances. As long as Madison signs off on the quarterly statements, the woman said. The transfer won't raise suspicion. Madison froze. Transfer? Sign off? Her name? Thomas's tone was irritated, sharp, clipped. She'll sign it. She signs anything I put in front of her. A pause. Then a dry laugh. From both of them. Madison's chest tightened. Her fingertips went numb. What transfer? What document? What scheme was unfolding with her as the unwitting accomplice? And then, the woman said a name. Lakeland. Lakeland International Holdings. A company Thomas once described as insignificant, irrelevant, barely worth looking at. So why was he now moving something through it? And why did he need her signature to do it silently? Madison was many things. Graceful. Soft-spoken. Perceptive. But naive? No. Not anymore. She had spent years convincing herself that Thomas's behavior wasn't abuse. Just stress. Just pressure. Just the nature of business. But this? This was planned. Calculated. Weaponized. He wasn't just cruel. He wasn't just dismissive. He was using her. Using her name. Her trust. Her legally bound authority as the spouse of a CEO to finalize documents he didn't want traced back to him. Before the conversation inside the office could end, Madison slipped away. Quiet. Fast. Instinctive. And fled downstairs, out the back door, into the garden. It was the only place in the entire property where Thomas never stepped. The night air was cold. The fountain whispered. The moonlight reflected across the marble tiles like a spilled secret. Madison sat on the stone bench. And inhaled. Long and slow. Her thoughts didn't spiral. They sharpened. This wasn't humiliation anymore. This wasn't marriage stress. This wasn't a moment of temporary cruelty. It was systemic. Intentional. Coordinated. And it meant one thing. Thomas had begun playing a game she never agreed to play. And she, quiet, underestimated, supposedly obedient, was done being a pawn. Madison straightened her posture. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes, usually soft, warm, forgiving, were steady, cold, calculating, just like his. But driven by something he didn't have. Morality. Clarity. Purpose. Tonight wasn't the end of their perfect facade. Tonight was the beginning of her awakening. Her awareness. Her reconstruction. She wasn't ready to fight yet. Not openly. But for the first time in years, Madison took the first step toward taking her life back. And eventually, his company. His legacy. His entire empire. Madison didn't sleep that night. Not because she was afraid. But because clarity had opened its eyes inside her. She stayed in the guest room, a place Thomas never entered, and watched the sky shift from violet to indigo to a pale morning blue. Every second felt like the quiet tightening of a knot that had gone unnoticed for years. By dawn, she was no longer the same woman who had walked into that house the night before. Thomas entered the dining hall at 7:04 a.m. Never early. Never late. Always precise. He didn't look at her. He rarely did. But today, Madison noticed something new. Secrecy clung to him like cologne. He took his seat, picked up his customized black titanium fork, and spoke without lifting his eyes. You have paperwork to sign today. The words weren't a request. They were a verdict. Madison's pulse didn't quicken. Her breath didn't falter. Instead, she smiled gently. The same smile he believed meant compliance. "Of course," she said softly. The tone he expected. The tone that hid everything. At 10 a.m., he sent the papers to her through his assistant. 6 pages. Minimal text. Too minimal. And then she saw it. The quiet detail that would have been invisible to someone less observant. A fund transfer authorization. A shell company redirection. A new ownership allocation for Lakeland International Holdings. Small numbers. Harmless wording. Harmless. If you didn't understand corporate structures, layered subsidiaries, or the way empires hid their bones in empty companies. But Madison had lived beside a CEO for 7 years. She absorbed everything. Even the things he never meant for her to see. And this? This wasn't small. It was the beginning of a pivot, a restructuring, a silent siphoning of assets before a major move. But the biggest shock wasn't the transfer. It was the signature line. Her name. Her legal identification number. Her marital authorization clause. The move required a spouse's consent. And Thomas always assumed hers was automatic. When Madison looked up, Thomas's assistant, a woman who had always been polite, warm, gently helpful, stood frozen. Not nervous. Not shy. But aware. Aware of what these papers meant. Aware of what Thomas was doing. Aware of Madison's role as an unknowing accomplice. "Do you need anything else, ma'am?" The assistant's voice trembled. "Not at the moment," Madison replied softly. But she watched the woman walk away with quick, tight steps. The walk of someone who knows too much. And fears even more. At noon, Thomas left for a business meeting. Madison waited exactly 7 minutes. Long enough for him to assume she was doing nothing. And then walked down the hallway toward his office. His office. The one room that symbolized everything. Control. Secrece. Power. She wasn't planning to break in. Not yet. But she wanted to understand the terrain. And the moment she reached the door, she heard voices inside. 2 senior board members. And Thomas. On speakerphone. Thomas's voice was crisp. "Once the transfer clears, Madison's signature will ensure the board doesn't question the restructuring. By then, the Lakeland acquisition will be irreversible." A board member chuckled. "So your wife still believes she's just signing charity approvals?" Silence. Then Thomas replied. "She believes whatever I tell her." It wasn't anger Madison felt. It wasn't heartbreak. It wasn't even humiliation. It was something far colder. Confirmation. Confirmation that he didn't merely underestimate her. He built his empire on that underestimation. And now? It was going to destroy him. Madison walked away from the door quietly, her heartbeat steady, her expression gentle. She headed to the garden. Her sanctuary, her thinking space. The only place in the mansion untouched by Thomas's shadow. She sat beneath the tall sycamore tree, the breeze catching strands of her hair, and reviewed the 6-page document with surgical precision. Thomas thought she would sign without question. He thought she would obey. He thought she would never notice. And that was his mistake. Because Madison didn't sign. She didn't destroy the papers either. She simply folded them, placed them into the hidden pocket inside her coat, and whispered to the wind. "If you want to use me, you regret it." This wasn't rebellion yet. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't war. It was the first quiet countermove. The kind that looks insignificant on the surface, but shifts the entire game underneath. Madison rose from the garden bench, straightened her clothes, and walked back toward the mansion. With a clarity she had never possessed before. Thomas believed the game had already begun. What he didn't realize was that Madison had just decided to become a player. And not just any player. The one who would eventually own the board. I woke up on Wednesday morning with a strange stillness inside me. Not peace, not fear, but the steady, focused quiet that settles in just before a storm decides where it wants to break. Thomas left early again. He didn't touch his coffee, didn't glance at me, didn't even pretend to care about the illusion of marriage we'd been maintaining for years. Fine. That worked in my favor. Because today, I wasn't just observing anymore. I was digging. By 9 a.m., the mansion was silent. Too silent. I walked to my private workspace. The room Thomas believed I only used for reading and charity work, and sat at my desk. I booted up my laptop, opened a hidden folder, and used a small code I hadn't typed in years. A code I created when Thomas first taught me simple corporate procedures. He had no idea what kind of memory I had. He had no idea how many details I'd stored away for later. And today was later. When the folder opened, I found a single email. One he had forgotten existed. One Thomas never knew I kept a copy of. A financial disclosure notice from 3 years ago. Routine. Standard. Forgettable. Except, the company email attached to it wasn't Thomas's. It was a different account. A private one. Hidden. Used only for confidential acquisitions. A shadow account. One I wasn't supposed to know existed. And the sender wasn't Thomas's attorney. It wasn't his CFO. It wasn't anyone from his company. The sender was a name that made my breath hitch for just a second. D. Kessington. I didn't recognize the name. But the tone of the email told me everything I needed to know. Formal. Cautious. Transactional. Someone who communicated like a man protecting his money. I traced the email header. Tracked the domain. Followed the breadcrumbs with the quiet persistence of someone who'd made up her mind. And what I found made my hands grow cold. It wasn't a vendor. Or a consultant. Or a partner. It was an international wealth management liaison. The kind used when transferring large sums overseas. Without detection. And the last transaction? $4.7 million. Approved by Thomas. Cleared through offshore channels. Tied to an acquisition shell under a name I recognized instantly. Lakeland International Holdings. The same company he wanted my signature to approve. The same name whispered in his office the day before. The same restructuring he assumed I'd stay blind to. But the worst part? The money wasn't going offshore. It was coming back. Returning. Full circle. To a bank in Miami. To an account under a disguised corporate name. And registered to her. Celeste Blake. The woman who humiliated me at the $1 million presentation. The woman Thomas insisted was just a colleague. The woman he defended more fiercely than he ever defended me. She wasn't just involved. She was benefiting. She was receiving payments disguised as acquisition funds. She was part of his restructuring. She knew everything. She had known for years. I leaned back slowly, closed my eyes, and let the truth settle into me like a knife sliding into its final position. This wasn't betrayal. This wasn't humiliation. This wasn't disrespect. It was collusion. I opened a fresh document. I created 3 new folders. I labeled each one carefully. Acquisition timeline. Financial irregularities. Marital liability documents. And then, I began compiling. Emails. PDF files. Screenshots. Bank statements. Typed notes. Evidence. Not to expose him yet. Not to confront him. Not to leave him. No. I was building something else. Something Thomas would never expect. Not revenge. Not escape. A lever. Something powerful enough to crack his empire in half. If he ever tried to force my hand again. Something that would give me a seat at the table he never wanted me to approach. I was no longer a spectator. I was a threat. At 2:11 p.m., my phone vibrated on the desk. Unknown number. Out of state. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. A low, composed voice spoke on the other end. Mrs. Carraway. This is Damien Kessington. We need to speak. Your husband has made a mistake. My breath caught. Not fear. Not shock. But recognition. D. Kessington. The name from the email. The shadow in the finances. The liaison tied to the offshore transfers. He wasn't calling Thomas. He was calling me. Why? How did he know I'd looked at that email today? Why now? What kind of mistake? I asked quietly. There was a pause. Then Kessington replied, voice lower, almost cautious. Mrs. Carraway. You aren't supposed to be left exposed like this. You're being used. And if you sign those documents, you'll take the fall for everything. My heartbeat stopped. Completely. What fall? I whispered. But he didn't answer. Instead, he said something far, far worse. Meet me tomorrow. In person. Because if Thomas finalizes the restructuring this week, you lose everything. Not him. Before I could respond, the call ended. Dead silence. I stared at the phone, at the desk, at the folders I'd just created, and a cold realization began to spread through me. This wasn't just betrayal. This wasn't just humiliation. This wasn't even manipulation. This was a setup. A plan. A coordinated move designed to use me as a shield. A scapegoat. So Thomas could walk away clean. I wasn't the wife anymore. I was the liability he planned to discard. And tomorrow, someone wanted to tell me exactly how deep the betrayal went. My hands trembled for the first time all day. Not from fear, but from clarity. The empire was cracking. The truth was leaking. And the man pulling the strings no longer controlled the narrative. I did. But the real question wasn't what Thomas planned. It was this. What else was I about to uncover? When I met the man who knew the truth, sleep didn't come that night. Not even for a moment. I lay in the guest room, the place that had quietly become my refuge, and listened to the air conditioner hum like a distant storm preparing itself. I wasn't scared of Thomas anymore. I wasn't scared of losing him, or losing the life we'd built, or losing the image people believed we were. No. What frightened me, truly frightened me, was how deep this thing seemed to reach. Thomas wasn't stupid. Reckless, yes. Cruel, definitely. But stupid? Never. So if he was moving money around, if he was pulling assets through shell companies, if he was dragging my signature into something international, something quiet, something almost untraceable, it meant this wasn't a midlife crisis. It wasn't a fling with Celeste. It wasn't about embarrassment or ego. It was bigger, colder, planned. And I finally understood something heartbreaking. Thomas didn't want me gone. He wanted me useful. Until I wasn't. And then? Disposable. I left the mansion early before sunlight could fully stake its claim on Florida's horizon. The sky was a bruised lavender. And the ocean air carried that salty heaviness that settles just before a storm. The address Damien Kessington sent me led to nowhere remarkable. A marina office. Small. Private. Tucked behind rows of quiet sailboats. Someone cautious chose that location. Someone who didn't want to be seen. I pulled into the lot right at 7:59 a.m. My hands rested on the steering wheel for a long moment as I stared at the office door. What am I walking into? The question echoed in my mind. And I didn't have an answer. But I stepped out of my car anyway. Because fear wasn't the enemy anymore. Ignorance was. Inside the office, a man stood near the window. Dark suit. Simpletier. Calm posture. Not intimidating. But unreadable. The type of man who never said a word he didn't intend. He turned toward me slowly. Mrs. Carraway. Mr. Kessington, I replied. My voice was quiet, steady. Perfectly polite. A tone Thomas always associated with obedience. But this wasn't obedience. This was caution. He gestured for me to sit. He didn't. I need to know why you contacted me, I said softly. He studied me with an expression that felt almost sympathetic. Not pity. Not condescension. Just recognition. As though he saw someone stepping into a fire she never asked for. Your husband, he began, is in the middle of a very delicate acquisition. One that requires clean signatures, clean liabilities, and no detectable conflict of interest. You unfortunately are now his conflict. He walked closer, holding a single folder. Black. Unmarked. Sealed. He is hiding assets, Kessington continued. Hiding partners. Hiding transactions. I swallowed. Is Celeste one of them? His eyes flicked upward. Quickly, sharply. A tell. Yes. My stomach tightened. Not because of jealousy. But because of confirmation. The truth had weight now, heavy, undeniable. But he wasn't done. She isn't just a partner, Mrs. Carraway. She is the mechanism he uses to funnel money through intermediary accounts. If this deal goes through, she walks away with protected assets. And me? I asked quietly. You, he said, take the legal liability. The room seemed to tilt. Not violently. But like reality was shifting just a few degrees off center. You're saying? He built the paper trail around me. He nodded once. Slow. Regretful. He needs a clean shield. A spouse is the perfect one, especially a spouse who trusts him. I let out a hollow breath. So he uses me, and then cuts me out. No, Kensington corrected. He uses you. And then lets the consequences fall on you. I stared at the floor for a long moment. My mind whispered. How long? How deep? How far has he already gone? But one question rose above the rest. A question I didn't want to ask but needed to. Why tell me? Kensington hesitated. Not out of guilt. But out of careful weighing. Then he said something that made the back of my neck go cold. Because Thomas thinks you're naive. But I've reviewed the documents you flagged on your system last night. You're not naive. You're dangerous. If you know the truth. I froze. Completely. He knew I accessed the email. He knew what files I opened. He knew every step I took. How? I whispered. Because the question came from a place deep inside me. A place that now realized. Nothing in my house had ever been private. Kensington sighed softly. Thomas monitors everything. Your devices. Your accounts. Your folders. My chest tightened. Not from fear. But from realization. Of course he monitored everything. Control wasn't a habit for Thomas. It was a reflex. A natural state. A part of him as instinctive as breathing. Except, he didn't realize one thing. By monitoring me, he showed his hand. And I was finally paying attention. Kensington opened the black folder. Turned it toward me. And I saw a document that almost buckled my knees. A marital liability transfer form. Drafted 6 months ago. Prepared by Thomas's legal team. Filed under confidential spousal risk mitigation. My name was on every page. My signature was forged. My identification number was attached to a company I had never heard of. And at the bottom, in bold, was the line that killed whatever remnants of hope I had left. In the event of legal inquiry, criminal proceedings, or international audit, responsibility falls solely on the spouse. The spouse. Me. Not Thomas. Not Celeste. Not the board. Just me. I felt the room spin. Slow. Quiet. Merciless. He was preparing to sacrifice me, I whispered. He already did, Kensington said. Now you need to decide whether to remain the scapegoat. Or become a threat he didn't anticipate. I lifted my eyes to him. Steady. Clear. Decisive. What do you want from me? He didn't flinch. He didn't soften. He didn't choose a polite lie. I want you to help me stop him. The marina was silent. The sky was darkening. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something dangerous rise in me. Not fear. Not heartbreak. Not humiliation. Purpose. Because if Thomas had been planning his betrayal for months, maybe years, then he had no idea how powerful I could be. Once I stopped loving him and started opposing him. And that was the moment. Quiet, unassuming, unnoticed by the world. That Madison Caraway stopped being a pawn and became something else. Something Thomas should have been terrified of. When I left the marina, I didn't start the car. I didn't even put my hands on the wheel. I just sat there. In a parking lot full of quiet sailboats. And secrets bigger than every ocean surrounding them. And tried to breathe through the truth that had just detonated inside me. Thomas wasn't cheating on me. He was dismantling me. This wasn't a betrayal of the heart. It was a betrayal of identity, of autonomy, and of trust on a level that felt almost surgical. And the worst part? I hadn't even seen the blade until the wound was already bleeding. But that ended today. Today, the knife finally had a direction. The road back to the mansion felt longer than it ever had. Florida sunlight poured through the windows, bright and warm and painfully indifferent to my life unraveling. At a red light, I whispered the truth out loud. Not for clarity, but for confirmation. He was going to let me take the fall. Hearing it spoken made it more real than any paper or signature ever could. But something else rose inside me too. Something cold, calculated, steady. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. Silently. Sharply. With a steadiness Thomas had never seen in me. Because he never cared to look. If he had, he might have realized a woman who loved quietly could destroy just as quietly. And far more effectively. When I pulled into the circular driveway, the mansion stood as it always did. Grand, polished, immaculate. But today, it looked like a cage I'd willingly walked into for years. Without noticing the bars. Inside, the marble floors gleamed. The air was cold. Too cold. Someone had adjusted the thermostat. Not for comfort. But for control. I wasn't paranoid. I was finally seeing clearly. And clarity is far more frightening than fear ever could be. There it sat. Right where I would see it. A single ivory envelope. Addressed in Thomas's precise, emotionless handwriting. Madison urgent. My pulse didn't quicken. My hands didn't shake. I simply opened it. With the calm of a woman who now expected anything. Inside were 2 documents. The first. A revised transfer authorization. The same shell company. The same structure. But this time, the wording had changed. Subtle. Slick. Legalistic. It attempted to close the loophole he had exploited last night. By not signing the first draft. He was tightening the net. Not because he suspected rebellion. But because he believed I was too naive to notice he rewrote the trap. The second document, though, was what froze me. A handwritten note. Short. Sharp. A threat disguised as reassurance. Sign these today. Don't ask questions. I'll explain everything tonight. Trust me. Trust me. 2 words that now tasted like poison. I placed the letter down exactly where I'd found it. Uncreased. Untouched. Unimpressed. Because explanations weren't coming tonight. Not from him. From me. As I walked through the mansion, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Small looks. Quiet hesitations. Tiny flinches. From the staff members who had worked for us for years. His assistant. Our housekeeper. Even the gardener. Not fear. Not guilt. But awareness. They'd seen things. Many things. Too many. And suddenly, the silence in this house didn't feel empty. It felt complicit. I wasn't just living with a man who betrayed me. I was living inside an ecosystem that benefited from my ignorance. But ecosystems collapse when the foundation shifts. And today, the foundation had a name. Madison Caraway. At 3:24 p.m., my phone rang. Thomas. The name felt different now. He felt different now. Or maybe, I was finally seeing him clearly. I answered with a soft, steady, hello. His voice came through calm, collected, carefully measured. The tone he used with investors. Right before he fed them a lie. Are you home? Yes. Good. Review the documents I left. We'll finalize things tonight. Finalize things. Not discuss. Not explain. Not collaborate. Finalize. The way you finalize a contract. A marketing campaign. A liquidation. A person. I will, I said quietly. And then, because I needed to confirm something, I added. Is Celeste joining us for the meeting? Silence. Sharp. Short. Deadly. Then he replied. Too casually. Of course not. Why would she be? I smiled. A smile he couldn't see. But would one day remember. With regret. No reason. I said softly. Just curious. He paused. Just long enough to reveal. That he was worried. Not about what I knew, but about what I might know. We'll talk later, he said. Don't make any decisions without me. When the call ended, I stared at my reflection in the glass. I wasn't the Madison he married. I wasn't the Madison he humiliated. I wasn't the Madison he underestimated. I was becoming something else. Something sharper. Something keener. Something capable of ending him. Not with rage, but with precision. And precision is something Thomas respected. Feared. Never expected from me. He should have. As the sun disappeared behind the palms, the mansion transformed into a darker version of itself. the kind of place where secrets thrived. But tonight, secrets weren't thriving. They were unraveling. One detail at a time. One lie at a time. On signature had never received. Because I wasn't waiting for Thomas anymore. I was preparing. Preparing evidence. Preparing leverage. Preparing an exit. That wasn't silent or soft or victim-shaped. But as I organized my files, as I documented every forged signature, every offshore funnel, every quiet lie, my phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. One line. He knows you met with me. My breath caught. Cold. Sharp. Immediate. Another message. Leave the house. Now. My eyes lifted toward the top of the staircase. And for the first time, I wasn't alone. Someone else was in the mansion. Someone who shouldn't be. Someone who hadn't made a sound. Until I'd read that message. A shadow moved at the top of the stairs. Slowly. Quietly. Thomas wasn't home yet. So whoever was standing there wasn't him. I froze at the bottom of the staircase. The marble under my feet was cold. But my pulse burned hotter than the Florida sun. The shadow didn't move again. Not yet. I counted silently. 3 slow breaths. 4. 5. Then I realized. This wasn't about fear anymore. This was about clarity. I could retreat. I could hide. Or I could confront. And Madison Caraway never backed down from confrontation. Who's there? I called, keeping my voice steady. The shadow shifted. Slow. Purposeful. Finally, a man stepped down into the dim light. He wasn't tall. He wasn't threatening in posture. But his eyes gray, calculating, steady. Cut through the pretense of my calm. Mrs. Caraway, he said. His voice low, precise, unhurried. Sit down. Please. I stayed standing. Hands at my sides. Every instinct screaming. Don't trust him. I'm Damien Kessington, he said. My breath caught. Not because I was startled. Because I hadn't expected him to follow me here. I didn't just contact you to warn you over the phone, he continued. I had to make sure you understood the scale of your husband's plans. And now. He opened a small briefcase, pulled out documents, and set them on the marble island. I leaned in, curiosity tightening around my chest. Inside were spreadsheets, emails, offshore transfers. Everything I'd begun compiling. But more detailed. Every move Thomas had made in the last 2 years. Every fake partner. Every hidden transfer. Every forged signature. It was overwhelming. Almost paralyzing. Until Damien spoke again. Do you see now why he's dangerous? I swallowed. Yes. Good. Because if you don't act carefully, he will make you complicit. In crimes that will bury you. Long before anyone realizes the truth. I stared at him. Processing. Calculating. And in that moment, a plan that had been forming quietly in the back of my mind began to sharpen. By 8:30 p.m., we had a plan. Simple in theory, terrifying in execution. Gather proof that Thomas and Celeste were colluding. Create a paper trail showing I discovered the fraud independently. Use leverage to stall transfers and freeze accounts until I could confront him publicly. Ensure the first strike looked accidental. Like an internal audit exposing the corruption. Not a wife taking revenge. Damien warned me. Timing is everything. If Thomas suspects you are aware, he will cover every angle. And you'll have nothing left. I nodded. I understood. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I stayed in the garden until midnight, listening to the wind through the palm fronds, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. Every detail mattered. The way Thomas slept with the shades open, the timing of the staff's rounds, the security cameras' blind spots. By 11:47 p.m., I was ready. Not to attack openly, not to make a scene, but to move my first piece in a game Thomas didn't realize had begun. I slipped into the mansion quietly, like a shadow among shadows, and retrieved the documents I had stashed in my private office. The folder was thicker than I remembered. He thought I was too naive to notice. But now I held it firmly, feeling its weight not as paper, but as power. And as I walked toward the master office, to plant evidence, to reroute files, to prepare the first dominoes of his empire to fall. I heard the faintest click behind me. I froze. The room was dark. But the sound was unmistakable. A lock. Turning. Someone else was in the mansion. Not Thomas. Not Damien. Someone else. And in that silence, I realized for the first time that the storm I had been preparing for was arriving faster than I had ever expected. I turned slowly, holding the folder against my chest like armor. The marble floor beneath my feet was slick with shadows, each step echoing through the empty mansion like a countdown. And then I saw her. Celeste Blake. Not a whisper of movement. Not a sound. Just her silhouette framed against the faint light of the hallway. Her presence was deliberate. Confident. The kind of confidence that comes from knowing you are untouchable. But today, she was the first piece on my board. "You're here early," I said quietly. Not angry. Not panicked. Measured. Like a predator greeting another predator. Celeste tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly. A small, polite smile. "Oh, Madison. I didn't think you'd be awake at this hour. Or capable of understanding what's happening." Her words were meant to sting. I let them slide. "I understand more than you think," I said. And for the first time, I noticed the slight tension in her stance. The imperceptible twitch that betrayed control. Control. Her greatest weapon. I stepped closer. Folder still in my hand. Heart steady, voice even. "Celeste, did Thomas tell you about the transfer? Or did you just figure out you'd be receiving millions under a company I'm legally tied to?" Her smile faltered for half a second. Half a second that was enough. "It's none of your business," she replied. I let out a slow breath. Calm. Measured. "You're right. It's none of my business. Until it becomes mine." I opened the folder and placed it on the marble island. All the documents she assumed were private. All the transfers, emails, and shell accounts now sat between us. The evidence was undeniable. And for the first time, Celeste wasn't untouchable. She paled slightly. She took a step back. And in that step, I knew the first domino had tipped. Before Celeste could react, my phone vibrated. "Damien." A single message. "He's returning early, move fast." Time collapsed. Every second was magnified. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum in my chest. I turned to Celeste. "You need to leave. Now." She froze. Then laughed nervously. "You can't stop this, Madison. You'll never." Her voice was cut off by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. "Thomas." I grabbed the folder. Pulled out 2 flash drives I had prepared days ago. One for Damien. One for myself. "You're coming with me," I said to Celeste. "Or you stay and take the fall." Her eyes widened. Fear flashed. The first real human emotion she'd shown. And just like that, the balance had shifted. I led her to the back exit. Through the garden. Past the fountain. Every step silent, deliberate. Thomas wouldn't see this coming. Not yet. Not tonight. By the time we reached the car, I had already sent the first batch of files to Damien. Evidence of the transfers. Evidence of the collusion. Evidence that would protect me and expose him. Celeste followed, silent. Finally aware that she was no longer untouchable. Finally realizing she was part of the domino chain. And I was the one tipping the first piece. Thomas arrived at the mansion 5 minutes later. The front door opened. And he froze. No documents on the desk. No folder in place. No files waiting. Just silence. And a lingering sense that for the first time, the woman he underestimated was now moving pieces he couldn't control. I was gone. Celeste was gone. And the first strike had landed. Quietly. Effectively. Invisible until it was too late. The empire he built on control, manipulation, and deception. The same empire he thought was untouchable, was starting to crack. And Thomas wouldn't know the scale of the damage. Until it was irreversible. The game had changed. And I was no longer the player he thought I was. I woke the next morning to the soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant calls of seagulls. The mansion felt hollow. Not because anyone was gone, but because I had changed the rules. I had shifted from being observed to observing, from being a pawn to becoming the player who could topple the board. And Thomas? He was about to discover just how far underestimating me would cost him. Damien called at 8:02 a.m. I answered immediately, not out of panic, but with precision. "Files received?" I asked calmly. "Yes," he replied. "Everything we need." "But Madison, he's already noticing irregularities. The board is asking questions." I let the words hang. Slow. Deliberate. Because I knew exactly what that meant. Thomas was scrambling. Already. "Good," I said softly. "Let him scramble. We control the timeline now." And in that moment, I realized the thrill of leverage. Quiet, controlled, inevitable, is more intoxicating than fear ever was. By 10 a.m., Thomas had arrived at the office. He walked in confident, precise, unaware. The kind of man who believes power protects him. I wasn't there. But my first move had already taken place. An anonymous email to the board. Just a few lines. But the content? Irrefutable. Recent review of Lakeland International Holdings reveals discrepancies requiring immediate internal audit. All relevant signatures must be verified. Confidential investigation ongoing. Within an hour, Thomas's carefully constructed presentation, the one he had meticulously prepared for the morning meeting, was unraveling. Emails pinged. Calls were made. Questions whispered. He was losing control. And I was miles away, watching the storm begin. At 1:17 p.m., Thomas's number flashed across my screen. His voice, tight and clipped, carried over the line. "Madison, what are you doing?" I smiled faintly, leaning back in my chair. "My first move," I said softly. "Your empire isn't untouchable. And apparently, neither are your secrets." He went silent. Then, sharper. "You've crossed a line." I let out a slow breath. "Yes, I did. And now you have a choice. Fix this before it's too late. Or face the consequences you've been hiding from me for years." I could almost hear him swallowing, his carefully controlled composure cracking. That was the sound of leverage, soundless to everyone else, but deafening to him. By mid-afternoon, the news reached the boardroom. A minor leak from the audit revealed Thomas's offshore transactions, Celeste Blake's involvement, and the forged spousal authorizations. Charles erupted. Phones rang. Heads turned. Thomas's empire, built on secrecy and manipulation, was cracking publicly, quietly, strategically, invisibly. And the only person who had orchestrated it? Me. The thrill of watching someone realize they underestimated you was a dangerous kind of calm. And as I sat back, Damien's voice over the phone reminded me. "Tomorrow, the second wave begins. Prepare carefully." I smiled to myself. Because I was ready. Not out of revenge. Not out of anger. But out of precision. The empire may have been his, but the game was mine now. By the morning of the second day, the mansion felt emptier than ever. Not because anyone had left, but because Thomas was scrambling. Emails from his CFO bounced back with questions he couldn't answer. Calls from partners went unanswered. Every move he had relied upon, every carefully timed maneuver was under scrutiny. And I wasn't there. I was outside the spotlight, pulling threads quietly, deliberately. Damien arranged a discreet meeting. A small, windowless room in downtown Miami. One where no one would think to look. I arrived 15 minutes early. He was already there, laptop open, coffee steaming. "Time to turn allies," he said quietly. "I tiltedmighed." Explain. There are board members and executives who've been loyal to Thomas for years. But they're loyal to money more than loyalty, Damien explained. Once they see the evidence, once they see the leverage, you'll have allies inside the empire without firing a single shot. I nodded. Because strategy isn't about brute force. It's about timing. And patience. Step 1. Identify the doubters. Step 2. Present evidence selectively. Step 3. Let them believe they are discovering it themselves. Step 4. Use their influence to isolate Thomas. By 11 a.m., I had a list. 5 key executives. 2 board members. all quietly dissatisfied, all quietly ambitious. And now, all quietly mine. Damien watched me organize the files, a slight smile crossing his face. You've learned fast, he said. Faster than most women in your position would dare. I didn't answer. I simply continued, methodical, deliberate. Fingers gliding over documents. Every note, every timestamp, every dollar trail, positioned for maximum impact. By the afternoon, the first email went out. Anonymous, but compelling. A snippet of an internal audit. A hint of offshore accounts. A question. Who benefits? Within an hour, the selected board members were calling each other. Thomas was called to justify himself repeatedly. Celeste, still unaware of the broader exposure, began asking questions that exposed her own role. And I sat back quietly, watching the ripple begin. For the first time in years, Thomas was reacting. Not orchestrating. Not manipulating. Reacting. And there is a difference. A dangerous difference. By evening, the second wave hit publicly. One of the board members, the youngest, the most ambitious, leaked an internal memo to the press. The headline spread like wildfire. Executive scandal. Offshore transfers under scrutiny. Wife may be unwittingly involved. Thomas's empire wasn't just cracking, it was shaking. Celeste's name was mentioned. Thomas himself faced scrutiny. And in the middle of it all, no one knew who had orchestrated it. Not Thomas. Not the press. Not Celeste. Only me. And the feeling? The quiet, controlled power? It was intoxicating. Because in the moment Thomas realized the walls were closing in, he also realized I had become the architect. And architects, unlike pawns, don't get sacrificed. By the time the sun dipped behind the Miami skyline, Thomas's world was no longer standing on foundations. It was balancing on splintered beams, each one groaning under the weight of the truth pressing down on him. And he had no idea that I was still pulling the strings. Damien sent me a message at 7:14 p.m. A screenshot. A forwarded thread. Subject line. Emergency board meeting attendance mandatory. The body of the email was chaos made formal. Questions about financial discrepancies. Concerns about forged signatures. Anxieties about acquisitions that never existed. Every line contained cracks. Every crack owed its existence to me. And then, the line that mattered most. We will need both Thomas and Madison present. I stared at that sentence for a long moment, feeling the full weight of its implication. They weren't calling me as a wife. They weren't calling me as a figurehead. They were calling me as a liability. Or as the person who held the real answers. Either way, I had leverage. More than I had ever possessed. At 9:02 p.m., I received a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Something told me not to. Madison? Celeste's voice. But not the polished, cold version. This one was shaken. Thin. Afraid. I think Thomas is going to pin this all on me, she whispered. I closed my eyes. Not out of sympathy, but out of confirmation. Of course he would. He had always needed someone to carry his guilt. Someone expendable. Someone indisposable. Meet me, I said. My voice calm, steady. You're no longer an accessory. You're a witness. She exhaled shakily, relief and panic tangled together. Where? Somewhere no one will expect, I said. A Ritz-Carlton conference floor. And for the first time, Celeste listened. Without arguing. Without posturing. Without arrogance. That told me everything. Thomas had already begun taking pieces off the board. And she had realized she was next. We met in a nearly empty hallway carpeted in navy and gold. Celeste looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Emotionally. She handed me her phone immediately. Screenshots. Voice notes. Emails Thomas didn't know she'd saved. Proof that she was more than complicit. Proof that she knew more than she ever let on. Proof that, intentionally or not, she had been an asset waiting to be flipped. And now? She was flipping. I don't want to go down for this, she whispered. It was his plan, all of it. I just played my part. I studied her. Quietly. Carefully. And for a moment. Just a moment. I saw the truth buried inside her fear. She wasn't evil. She wasn't innocent. She was a survivalist. Just like me. Except I had learned lessons. She never bothered to understand. Then help me, I said softly. And you walk away untouched. Her breath hitched. Is that even possible? With me, I replied. Everything's possible. By the time we exited the Ritz, the final trap had been assembled. Celeste's evidence. My audit trail. Damien's financial breakdown. The board members' internal suspicions. All of it was leading to the 10 a.m. emergency meeting, where Thomas would finally discover that every thread he'd pulled, every manipulation he'd perfected, had been quietly redirected right back toward him. Not by the board. Not by Celeste. Not by external forces. By me. And as I drove home, Feijiro, my personal driver, asked gently, "Ma'am, shall I wait?" I looked out at the quiet Florida streets, the palm trees swaying under distant lightning. The air trembled with the storm rolling toward us. Just like the storm rolling toward Thomas. "No," I whispered. "Tomorrow, everything changes." The city was still asleep when the storm finally broke. Clouds heavy, swollen with the weight of the night's secrets, rolled across the skyline as if mirroring the turmoil rising beneath them. And in the quiet before dawn, the world held its breath, the same way she did. Madison stood alone by the window, watching the first ripple of sunlight push back the darkness. But there was no warmth in it, not today. Not when the truth she had discovered hours earlier still trembled like a live wire inside her. Thomas thought he'd buried his mistakes. He thought control was the same as loyalty. He thought silence was the same as love. But he was wrong. And for the first time in their entire marriage, Madison no longer felt afraid of what came next. She felt ready for it. Her phone buzzed on the marble countertop behind her. One glance at the screen was enough. A single text. A single name. A single sentence that would turn the entire game on its head. "It's time. L." Madison's pulse steadied. She typed only one word back. "Proceed." The storm outside cracked open like a warning bell. This was it. The move she had been preparing for. The moment Thomas never imagined could even exist. Thomas woke with the comfortable arrogance of a man who believed the world still belonged to him. He hadn't yet seen the message. He hadn't seen the documents. He hadn't realized that the people he trusted most had already switched sides. He hadn't grasped that Madison, quiet, loyal, predictable Madison, had finally stopped playing by the rules he created. But he would. Oh, he would. By the time his feet touched the floor, one of his board members was already in a secure room downtown, signing the first piece of paper that would dismantle his power from the inside. By the time he reached for his morning coffee, 2 divisions of his company had already rerouted their reporting lines to Madison's silent partner. And by the time he checked his email, the first fracture would appear. A single crack in the mirror he'd spent years polishing. And once it began, it wouldn't stop. "You wanted to humiliate me," she breathed softly. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't waver. It cut like a blade. "You wanted to break me. But you forgot something. People who break quietly are the ones you should fear the most." Lightning flashed behind her, illuminating the determination carved into her features. The kind that only rises after betrayal. The kind shaped by sleepless nights and unspoken tears. The kind that no longer has anything to lose. The kind that wins. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was even shorter. "Done." Madison exhaled slowly. The first domino had fallen. The rest would follow, inevitable, unstoppable. Precise. She took one last look at her reflection. Then walked away from the window with the quiet resolve of a woman who understood her own power at last. Today was no ordinary morning. Today was the day the king realized the queen had learned how to move. By 10 a.m., the boardroom was buzzing. Phones rang nonstop. Executives whispered in clusters. The air smelled of coffee, fear, and anticipation. Thomas walked in, confident as ever, or at least trying to be. His tailored suit did nothing to hide the tightening in his jaw. The subtle twitch of a man already sensing the ground beneath him shift. He scanned the room, eyes landing on familiar faces, only to find them staring back with a mix of suspicion and guarded triumph. And in that moment, he knew. He was losing control. The doors opened. Madison entered quietly, her heels soft against the polished floor. No dramatic entrance. No words yet. Just presence. Heads turned. Murmurs spread. She wasn't here as a wife. She wasn't here as a victim. She was here as the architect. Thomas tried to maintain composure. Madison, what are you doing here? She smiled faintly. Observing. And clarifying. Clarifying. A word that carried 1,000 unspoken threats. She pulled the folder from her briefcase, setting it on the table. Inside, all of Thomas's hidden transfers, Celeste's involvement, the forged signatures, every detail laid bare. The room went silent. Where did you get these? Thomas demanded, voice tight, almost breaking. Where you thought no one would look. Madison said softly. Where you thought I would never see. Heads turned toward him. Whispers grew louder. Phones began typing, recording, sending. The empire he built with fear and manipulation was unraveling in real time. And for the first time, he was forced to look at her, not the wife he had humiliated but the strategist he had never imagined. Celeste stood beside Madison. Hands shaking slightly. Eyes wide with fear and realization. I didn't know he would try to pin this on me, she confessed. Her voice wavered. But everything he did, it's all documented. And Madison? She helped me record it all. Thomas's face paled. The whispers became gasps. Board members shifted uneasily. The realization hit him like a punch to the chest. His allies were gone. His secrets exposed. His carefully constructed facade crumbling in front of everyone. The chairman stood, clearing his throat. We will be initiating a full audit immediately, he said, voice firm. And until it's resolved, Mr. Carraway will have no operational authority. Thomas opened his mouth to protest. But no words came. He was trapped. By the evidence. By the people he thought he controlled. By the wife he had underestimated. Madison leaned back slightly. Her expression calm. Unshaken. The storm she had orchestrated had hit full force. And in that pause, she knew. Revenge wasn't about shouting or confrontation. It was about control, precision, and inevitability. By the end of the meeting, Thomas was sidelined. Celeste was protected. Board members aligned quietly with Madison. Media had caught wind, but the narrative remained controlled. Madison stepped out into the Florida sunlight, feeling the warmth on her face. Not a warmth of relief, but a warmth of power reclaimed. She had been humiliated. She had been betrayed. She had been underestimated. And now? She was untouchable. The boardroom wasn't just a battlefield. It was her proving ground. And she had won. The Florida sunset spilled gold and crimson across the mansion's lawn. Palm fronds swayed gently in the evening breeze. The kind of peaceful rhythm that belies chaos just passed. I stood on the balcony, coffee warm in my hands, listening to the faint hum of traffic far below. Everything had changed. Thomas was sidelined. Celeste was safe. The empire he had built with arrogance, manipulation, and secrecy was now under scrutiny and under my control. It wasn't triumph that filled me. Not exactly. It was clarity. The kind that comes after betrayal, after humiliation, after years of silence. I had been broken. I had been ignored. I had been underestimated. And yet, in all that, I had found a version of myself stronger than I ever knew existed. I had learned how to watch, how to wait, how to act with precision, and most importantly, how to reclaim my life on my terms. I sat in the study alone. Documents stacked neatly. The chaos of the past days reduced to paper and files. I thought of Thomas. The man who humiliated me. Who underestimated me. Who believed control was his birthright. I thought of Celeste. The woman who had been caught in his scheme. Who had almost become a pawn. Until she chose survival. And I thought of myself. Not as the wife who cried silently in the dark. Not as the one who was betrayed. But as the strategist, the observer, the woman who had turned the storm back on its architect. The lesson was simple. Strength is quiet. Power is precise. And revenge, when earned, is most effective when it comes wrapped in inevitability. As the last rays of sunlight faded into night, I knew this wasn't about hatred. It wasn't about punishment. It was about recognition, self-worth, control. Life had humiliated me. Betrayal had bruised me. But in the end, I had reclaimed everything that truly mattered. My dignity, my power, and my voice. And for anyone watching, listening, or reading this story, never let anyone define your limits. Never let humiliation become your identity. And remember, strength often comes quietly. Until it doesn't. Thomas would rebuild. Celeste would move on. And I would continue forward. Stronger. Wiser. Prepared. Because life will always throw storms in your path. But the ones who survive? They learn to command the thunder.